I am pleased to welcome Reverend Cooley from the Unitarian Universalist Church in Annapolis for our meditation / story and message today. We're going to have a combo pack here. Reverend Dawn believes that Unitarian Universalists are called to love the hell out of the world and tries to practice this on a regular basis. She's passionate about helping congregations adapt to the changing cultural religious landscape through her work as an interim minister. Having grown up in the Washington, D.C. area, Dawn has spent the last 25 years in the Midwest. God bless you. Serving congregations in Minnesota, Iowa, Kentucky, Illinois, and now Grand Prize in Indy. She'll be UUI's interim minister until July 2026. So welcome to our pulpit, Dawn.
Thank you so much. It is so good to be with you all today. I think I was last here this winter.
It was maybe January.
So it's good. It's very good to be with you again today. I want to start today with a story. And this is a Unitarian Universalist story from my friend Sarah. And it goes a little bit like this. Once upon a time, how all good stories start.
Yes.
About 180 years ago, there was a Unitarian named Henry David Thoreau. Raise your hand if you've heard of him. Okay, excellent. He's kind of famous for writing a book called Walden Pond. When he was 28, Henry decided to go out into the woods all by himself. He wanted to try living a simple life. He built a little cabin next to a beautiful pond called Walden. He planted a garden and grew his own food. He wanted to see what it was like to live off the land. And even though he had to do a lot of work, he still found time to read a lot of books, because there wasn't social media, and to write. Now, a lot of Unitarian Universalists really love this story. It feels peaceful and quiet and brave in some ways, right? And sometimes grown-ups even say, oh, I say this a lot, I wish I could run off to the woods, right? And live like Henry. And then sometimes we sigh like this. Oh. You sigh like that? Oh, very nice, very nice. See, I know you're used to sighing like that too. And it is a beautiful story. And as with most fairy tales, there's a lot more to this story than that. First of all, Henry didn't own the land where he built his cabin. It belonged to a friend of his, the Unitarian minister, Reverend Waldo Emerson, and before that, the land belonged to the Nipmuc and the Massachusetts people who lived there a long time before either Henry David Thoreau or Ralph Waldo Emerson. Now, Henry's cabin was pretty small, about the size of what we would call a tiny house today, about 10 feet by 15 feet, but no loft area, so imagine that. So about the size of a shed, a tiny house. And even though Henry wanted to live simply, he didn't build the cabin all by himself. Ralph and another friend of him helped them move the logs and to build the walls. And Henry also was able to borrow tools and supplies from his friends. Now, Henry did grow a lot of his food, but not all of it. His mom, Cynthia, and his sister, Sophia, brought him things like bread and butter. They even did his laundry. And back then, doing laundry was not easy. There were no washers and dryers, just water, soap, a big bucket, and lots of scrubbing by hand. Sometimes Henry walked into town and bought things like meat or paper or ink, and he paid for those things by working here and there, occasionally writing for money or helping people to measure land. So he didn't do it all by himself. He didn't even do his own laundry. So, am I telling you this to make fun of Henry David Thoreau? No, absolutely not. Actually, he told us all of this stuff in his own book. His book actually says all of this. But a lot of people tell the story, the fairy tale about Henry David Thoreau without actually talking about the reality behind it, of how he didn't produce his own food. He didn't cook all of his own meals. He didn't do his laundry. Okay, so just because he got some help, does that mean that what he did at Walden Pond wasn't important? I don't think so. Henry wanted to see how much he could do with his own on his own, but he knew he couldn't do everything. He was curious, and the people who loved him were pretty curious too, right? And so they wanted to support him because it can be really fun to support your friend who's doing something that they're passionate about, right? The reason we still talk about Henry and Walden Pond today is because his experiment actually does still really matter. Sometimes people say it's a story about one person going out into the woods all alone. But if you look a little closer, it's actually a story about community. It's about how helping each other can help big ideas to grow. And big things can happen when we help each other. And that's what Unitarian Universalists are like. We're the kind of people who dive into curious and exciting projects. And we're also the kind of people who bring each other bread when someone we love is doing something really exciting and great. So when we tell the story that way, it's not so much fairy tale, but it's still a really good story. And I invite you to sit with that for a few breaths, just a few moments before we transition into the message. Okay, I have another story. I want you to imagine that there is a man who, against all odds, achieved great success by pulling himself up by the bootstraps. He built his empire from scratch. He relied solely on his own brilliance and perseverance, and he stood as a shining example of what it means to be truly self-made. Or so the story goes. And beloveds, story is rarely, if ever, true. We hear about figures like Elon Musk and Donald Trump held up by some as paragons of self-reliance. But Musk, the tech visionary who has seemingly appeared out of nowhere to revolutionize space travel, electric cars, and maybe the government, benefited from significant family wealth. And Trump, the business mogul who likes to claim he started with just a small loan of $1 million from his father, as if $1 million was small. But in reality, over time, his inheritance and financial support amounted to hundreds of millions. Now, though it might hurt some of us to mention them in the same paragraph, sadly, these stories share some things in common with the myth of our own beloved Henry David Thoreau, often idealized for his time in Walden Pond, living off the land in solitude. Except, as we just heard a few minutes ago, he often walked to the nearby town of Concord to visit family and friends and join them for meals. And my goodness, his mother and his sister did his laundry. And he was living rent-free on land owned by his friend. Thoreau's experience at Walden was absolutely not in any way one of complete isolation and self-reliance. It was a carefully structured experiment supported by a network, families and friends. Beloveds, no one does it alone. Ever. And yet, this myth of independence, of radical individuality, continues to persist. At a minimum, this myth ignores the many ways that individuals benefit from collective resources and societal structures. It ignores things like public infrastructure, like roads and transportation systems, to education systems, to government programs and subsidies. It ignores legal and regulatory frameworks that protect business interests and healthcare and public health initiatives and social safety nets and military and national security that protect trade routes. And oh yeah, let's not forget corporate bailouts and financial protections preventing economic collapse. When we look at it closely, it is clear that success is never a solitary endeavor, but the result of collective effort and shared resources. Radical individualism, this belief that the individual comes first and last and always, and their reliance on others is a sign of weakness, that's myth. Now, the roots of this myth of radical individualism come from a variety of places. It didn't develop in a vacuum. It is propped up by patriarchy, which valorizes traditionally masculine traits like independence and dominance and competition, while devaluing the traditionally feminine traits like interdependence, collaboration, and care work. Of course, these gender traits are themselves made up. But this is a mindset that erases feminine wisdom, dismissing as quaint or outdated the idea that it takes a village. It's also this myth of radical individualism propped up and perpetuated by racism and xenophobia, which marginalize ancestral knowledge, communal practices, and the intergenerational resilience of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color cultures around the world. Wisdom traditions that have long prioritized mutual care, collective thriving, and relational accountability over individual conquest. This radical individualist ethos is reinforced by capitalism, which thrives on competition and rewards the few at the expense of the many. And it tells us to prioritize personal gain over collective well-being, as if you can do well while others are struggling. It convinces us that our worth is measured by what we achieve on our own. And we Unitarian Universalists have to grapple with the reality that a form of radical individualism was preached from our 19th century transcendentalist pulpits and has profoundly influenced our faith since then. Now, don't get me wrong, transcendentalism offered an extremely important counterpoint to the Calvinist view of human nature as inherently sinful, and instead it embraced an optimistic view of humanity. Transcendentalists believed in the inherent goodness and potential of every individual to realize their own divine nature. Part of the way to do this was through solitude and being in the natural world. And these can be really, really good, important things. But the Transcendentalist movement, with figures like Emerson and Thoreau at its forefront, also emphasized self-reliance and personal spiritual awakening, which has been twisted to support this idea of radical individuality. Emerson's essay, aptly titled Self-Reliance, famously proclaimed that each individual should only trust their own inner voice and avoid conformity, reinforcing the idea that success and fulfillment are personal pursuits, not collective ones. Over time, the focus on inner truth and autonomy contributed to a belief system that one should seek fulfillment independently, often disregarding the importance of communal wisdom and collective action. And this was formative to both our national and to our Unitarian heritage. But now we find ourselves at a crucial moment as we witness the rise of global fascism and increasing economic inequality. A moment when it's necessary to shift from radical individualism being something that can truly sustain us in these fraught times, because it can't. So what can sustain us in these fraught and scary times? Creating communities of mutual aid. Okay, what do I mean by that? Let's break that down. Okay, mutual aid is more than just helping each other out. It's a commitment to collective care, solidarity, and shared responsibility. It's the understanding that our well-being is interconnected and that no one thrives alone. Mutual aid understands that by pooling our resources, skills, and our compassion, we can build together resilience in the face of uncertainty. Communities of mutual aid are about creating networks of support that empower participants to meet their own needs, out of a deep recognition that our shared humanity and interdependence. It does take a village not just to raise a child, but simply to exist in today's world. We need help. For those of us who have had the privilege of believing that the government was on our side, was of the people, by the people, and for the people, we may be waking up to a stark reality that others around the globe known as their reality for generations. So communities of mutual aid have long been a vital survival strategy for marginalized and oppressed people, who have long faced systemic barriers to accessing essential resources and support, even here in the United States. These communities practice mutual aid through endeavors like community-run food programs, informal housing assistance, or grassroots health initiatives. In the face of discrimination and exclusion from mainstream institutions, being a part of a community of mutual aid allows people to reclaim agency, to foster resilience and build solidarity, ensuring that no one is left behind. From LGBTQ+ support networks offering shelter and medical aid, to immigrant communities organizing childcare and legal assistance, communities of mutual aid provide a powerful model of care and resistance, grounded in the principle that everyone's well-being is interconnected. We are all a part of the interdependent web. By connecting with our neighbors and organizing within our communities, we build resilience against oppressive systems. This collective support ensures that together we can withstand and overcome the challenges ahead. Now, perhaps more than ever, we must know each other, support each other, and resist the forces that seek to divide and empower us. UUA President, the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, in her statement after the November election last year, reminded us that we are a sanctuary people. Beloved's heresy and radical individualism aren't the only things in our history. Our Unitarian Universalist tradition also is one of offering solidarity, shelter, and asylum, from the abolitionist movements to helping refugees flee Nazi Germany during World War II, through the civil rights movements to solidarity with LGBTQ+ communities. We have a tradition of creating spaces of refuge. We know we are strong enough when we care, strongest when we care for one another in tangible and meaningful ways. But here's the thing, we can't do mutual aid if we don't know what's going on with one another. Mutual aid requires knowledge and intimacy and presence, and so often it requires a vulnerability that we are often uncomfortable with, even in our congregations. Sadly, the way it is now in UU congregations on Sunday morning all over the place, not every congregation, and maybe not this congregation, but in many congregations. Many people come to the Sunday service, receive inspiration, and then spend coffee hour busily engaging in committee work or church business without truly communicating, without really connecting, without really knowing what's going on in each other's lives. It's easy to fall into the trap of being an unintentional consumer of what happens on Sunday morning, especially when we're taught that that's what we're supposed to be. To truly become a community of mutual aid, we need to instead be developing deep and intentional relationships, knowing each other's struggles, celebrating each other's joys, and being present to one another in times of need. Shifting from being a consumer of church to a co-creator church can be a big shift. In fact, it presents us with something called an adaptive challenge, meaning a complex problem that can be solved, that cannot be solved with technical solutions or quick fixes, like just creating a committee, but instead requires deep transformation in values and behaviors and ways of thinking. Unlike technical problems, which can be addressed with existing knowledge and expertise, adaptive challenges demand learning and experimentation, a willingness to fail, and shift in mindset. Adaptive challenges often involve uncertainty and resistance to change and the need for collective effort and leadership. Part of the adaptive challenge that's before us now requires a shift in mindset from viewing church as the place we go to or attend, to instead viewing church as a community that we cultivate. It means moving beyond our transactional approach, church being where we come to receive inspiration or participate in a program, to a more interdependent and transformational approach. Church as where we create a community, mutual support. Now, true mutual aid demands that we create structures that foster ongoing connection and accountability. So in a congregation, that might look like establishing robust small group ministries or zip code care circles within a congregation where members commit to regularly check in with one another and share life updates. It might mean developing a buddy system, pairing newer members with longtime congregants to build relationships that exist beyond Sunday morning. However it happens, these intentional practices help weave a web of care that strengthens our bonds with each other and nurtures a deeper sense of belonging. And creating a community of mutual aid requires us to share our vulnerabilities, to ask for help when we need it, and to recognize that interdependence is a strength, not a weakness. This is hard because it challenges the cultural norms of self-sufficiency and privacy that many of us have been conditioned with. For some of us, it's hard to ask for help because we've been taught not to show weakness, not to make ourselves vulnerable. For others, asking for help has been dangerous or ignored if we have asked for help. We are so often told to keep our struggles private, to avoid burdening others, or to project an image of having it all together. Beloveds, no one has it all together. I was working for Food Not Bombs one time, preparing food baskets, and someone was helping put the baskets together, shyly asked if she could have some leftovers because food was tight at home. We gave her a basket, because mutual aid doesn't just mean doing charity for them or others. It means helping each other. Shifting to a culture of mutual aid means stepping outside our comfort zone and allowing ourselves to be truly seen, whether that means asking for help when we're struggling, or sharing our vulnerability in trusted spaces, or being willing to receive support as well and as readily as we give it. It means moving away from the idea that strength is measured in how much we can do alone or how much we can do for others, and instead recognizing that true strength comes from our willingness to lean on each other. It is mutually beneficial. And mutual aid isn't just about responding to crises. It's about proactively building relationships of trust and reciprocity. Creating a community where no one feels like they have to carry their burdens alone, where joy is amplified through collective celebration. Creating a community of mutual aid calls us to ask, how are we supporting the most vulnerable lives? How are we showing up for each other outside these walls? How are we putting love at the center? As we engage this adaptive challenge, this shift from a mindset of radical individuality towards one of mutual aid, let us remember that interdependence is not just a belief or a value. It is those, but it's also a practice, a way of being in community together, a sacred commitment to one another. By embracing interdependence, we affirm the truth that our strength lies not in standing alone, but in showing up for each other with open hearts and open hands. May we cultivate communities of mutual aid, where vulnerability is met with compassion, where support is freely given and received, and where love truly is at the center of all we do. May it be so. May we make it so together.